In this video, I'm going to cover a lot of different things about Google Draw. But my hope is that this doesn't become too overwhelming. So some of these things like file organization and extra details on moving and saving and copying images, I would treat shallowly because those might be appropriate to be more in depth in a different video. Now, these are going to be Google drawings. These can be linked to a Google document. And just before I jump into this, a little bit of a touch on the why. No matter who you are, if you create things in this school that other people need to see, this is something that you could use. And then if you're a teacher, I also think that there's a surprise benefit. And for me, that surprise benefit would be when upper school students look at kind of shoddy materials that look like they're put together haphazardly, they're judging you and they're probably less likely to be as disciplined in a room that the materials look more presented and more clean. And it's kind of like a subconscious way of managing the classroom. So if you put clean looking materials in front of them, they're interpreting that as you have your stuff together and I am more likely to listen to this person. Throughout this video, I'd also like to encourage that maybe you treat this one as instructional, maybe tagging along as you do or dragging and dropping images of your own, because otherwise these will be things that would likely be just reset from your memory and you'd have to come back to this video repeatedly. To do that, you would probably want to have a YouTube video open and you'd be jumping back and forth. And I'll make a quick point. If you're doing something like that in full screen, it makes it pretty darn impossible. So back out of full screen, resize your windows as you see fit. So in here, as I talk about creating and modifying, the first thing I could show you is, a border. So before I even open a new file or anything, there aren't really necessarily like border creation settings, but if I wanted to, I could choose a shape located in my toolbar, and I could create a shape that is the size of my entire file, and in doing so, it looks like I'm going to cover up everything I just created. But then you could change some details where you could make it to where it's no longer filled in. If you were to click outside of your file, these would go away. Outside of your object, these would go away. So make sure you still have that object chosen. The fill color would not be white, because that would still cover everything up, but rather transparent, so that you could see through it. The thickness can be changed by choosing the border weight, and the border weight of the shape could be 4-point if you want it kind of small. You can click and choose it again and play around and see if you like thicker and thicker borders. But that gives it a nice, clean look that calls attention to what is out there. Now this would be an example of how maybe I open something that's existing and I could just modify it to be the way I'd like. I'm going to trash this mention of the border, and I'm going to move down to talking about getting an image from the web. I have an already open Google Draw, and this is a standalone file. And what I mean by that is this. If I were to go in and I were to insert a drawing, and I were to choose New, this would be embedded inside of my Google Draw. Inside of my Google document. And so that if I went to this and I tried to make some changes, this would exist in here, but you would find that by doing it with the Insert, Drawing, and New feature like I just did, that it's going to be more limiting. Mostly with regards to shifting the borders and things around, but it's probably nice to do these separate unless it's a very simplistic drawing. And since I said I'd make this instructional, maybe this is a good time to create like a folder where you generate things or practice stuff, and you could maybe just call it New Rubens Tech Stuff. And then in that folder, I have a Google drawing and a document created, Google Draw Demo, and I'm putting not embedded so that you guys know that I'm doing this in a way that it's not embedded. So I'm going to get an image from the web. And I'm going to say, well, we're going to drag this. And this is nice when it works. So I've Google searched Earth at night from space. And if I look at this, I don't need a crazy high quality image. And that's an important point because if I drag this image directly into Google Draw, this is a low quality image. The results that you get from Google are insane, and if they generated high-quality images for all of these different thumbnail previews, it would take forever to generate. If I just do a click and drag, I can move it up to my other tab that I have open and patiently wait and then drag down here and release. That is how you would get an image from the web. Now you might be like, well, why am I not just inserting an image and doing the search features within Google that are embedded? I dislike that because sometimes they tag it or they put little things here and it kind of messes around with your ability to customize this the way you want it. So when it works, that's what you would do. Sometimes it doesn't work though. So I'll show you a couple more things you could do if that was a dead end. You could do a control click. So while holding control click, copy image. Control clicks bring up the less common features. And then I could jump back here and I could do a control click and I could choose paste. If I look here, I can learn hotkeys over time because it says this icon and V, and this is your command button. And if you look to the left of the spacebar, you'll see the command button is right there, and you could just hit Command V. So that was when I copied and pasted it from the internet. Sometimes that is a dead end as well. I have these in increasing degree of challenge. The other thing I could do is I could drag this image temporarily to my desktop, where it would end up getting dumped, and I could open up a Finder window and find it here, and then drag it and drop it the same way I did the other ones into Google Draw. Usually, if that's a dead end, this always works. You can do a control click and choose Save Image As, give it a name, make sure it gets located on your desktop, and then from the Finder, drag in whatever you get. I'm deleting that to keep a clean desktop. If you ever have something that's for some reason copyright protected or a different file format or something strange is happening, while holding Shift, hold Command, and then hit the number 4, and you will get crosshairs, which will let you take a picture of anything online. This is something I do all the time so that I can grab images from the web. I know that that was exhaustive, but I think it's kind of nice to be thorough there. And those are all unique things, so I'm only touching on those quickly, or hopefully it felt that way. And since this is an image from the web, I think of these as being like the figures that you would see inside of a textbook or whatever. So I'm going to show you one other thing I might do with these. If I center an image, it'll end up suggesting red vertical and red horizontal lines if I wanted to get it in the center of the page. So with this vertical line in place, I'm going to create a text box now. Maybe I make it the width. And then I begin to type a description. Earth as seen from space. Depending on how I feel about this, I could select all the text, decrease the font size. If I only see limited choices and I want to be able to center it, usually I can find that here. And you'll notice that there's left, center, right, justified, top, bottom, and middle settings. So sometimes it's nice to have it centered vertically in the middle as well as horizontally in the center. This is Earth as seen from space, and when I'm creating something in a label for a figure or a small description, maybe I change the font size or maybe I make it bold. Command B is a way to quickly make something bold if it's chosen. Command A is a quick way to choose everything you need. And if I did Command A out here, it chooses all the different objects I had. To me, that makes sense because I was outside of it. So if I wanted to choose the text, I'd have to make sure I was not on the box, but actually inside of the text and hitting Command A to do that. The only other thing you might want to do is put a border around a picture if it's like white or whatever and you want it to stand out as a separate thing. And I did that by clicking on the object and choosing the thickness. You can also change the color if for some reason. Now that touches on a couple things so far. Getting an image in, and then if it doesn't work, trying to find ways to get around it, and then also kind of tagging and labeling Earth as seen from space, or tagging a figure. Now I'm going to focus on shapes. and text boxes. I don't need anything here, so I'm going to hit Command A and hit delete. I'm not cutting or anything, and just the delete key will take care of that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, we're going to develop shapes now. And if you're going to be building a top-down web, it's important that you want to get your first shapes right. The reason is, it's nicer to change the formatting on the original than copy that and not have to change the formatting on 10 things after you've done all this hard work. To build a shape, find the Shape tool, click it, and then in the pull-down, you can hover over any of these different things to see what you might be interested in. There's the general shapes, arrows if you're doing flow diagrams and what have you, callouts if for some reason you wanted to make this like a quotation or a talk bubble or a star. And then there's even like little equation features here, but I'll just focus on shapes and treat this like everyone's interested in choosing the rounded rectangle. Things like the diamond work, but you'll find that this gets a little bit frustrating as you start to type text in, it gets to be pretty limiting. So again, this might be a good point to tag along. So click and drag to create your shape the size you think looks tasteful. And when I'm saying get my first one right, I can double click in here and I can just say main idea. Now this looks in poor taste because it's aligned to the left, and if I have a bubble here or an object here, I'm thinking that it would look best centered. Since my cursor's flashing in there, that tells me I'm ready to edit text. While holding the command key, I can hit A for all, and that chooses all my text. If you dislike hotkeys and you're not ready at that point yet, just do a click and drag to choose your text. Command B will make it bold, and then I can go to the alignment and I can choose center. Also, if you're wanting to guarantee that this stays in the middle, you could click on that to be extra thorough, but it's fine. I can either increase the font size here, or I can type directly in or choose the pull down. Never noticed that before. Even though 36 is there, if you wanted something between 30 and 36, you can type 33. They're just not going to bog you down with all of those different choices. You know, these are rarely used, but you could also pull that in more if you like the aesthetic. So there's this little yellow icon there that either lets you widen this so much back to where it's a rectangle without rounded, or keep it as it is. I just hit Command Z because I wanted to back up. Command Z is a way of undoing something. And now that I have my first one right, I'm going to show you how I could either copy and paste this or just straight up duplicate it. By the way, you could also change your fill color and so on by choosing the paint. Change the font color, and if you ever find yourself confused with what's happening because you're trying to change the fill color and this just keeps on going on, make sure that you realize that that's the highlight color that you chose by accident and not something different. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to copy and paste this. Well, if I choose an item, I can always use my menus and choose Edit, Copy, but look to the right of that Command key. You'll see the letter C. So if I did Command C, that would work the same as if I hovered and then clicked on the copy choice. Likewise, I could go and I could hit Command V, or I could click here. Hotkeys, as you get more comfortable with it, it's like you choose an item, Command C, Command V, and then you can move it. And then if you remember, your computer is still thinking about the fact that you copied that a moment ago. So Command V means you can just paste the same things multiple times. And that's how I would adjust that way. Now that's using copy and paste, which is a two-step process, but many programs let you just straight up duplicate things. And so if I have something chosen in most Google programs and most Mac computers programs, I can hit Command D. So I'm holding Command and hitting D. Now I'm going to shrink this guy down horizontally because I'd like it to have the same height, but I'm thinking that as a supporting detail, I'm not going to be able to fit 3 of these in here. But because of the way I set this up, it matches the same height, and it looks clean. So now I wouldn't go back and Command D this guy, because for cohesion, and if I keep this level, it would be nice to have all of these at the same elevation, and all. I'll change the word to detail so I don't get tripped up here. And I'm also not typing a ton because I don't want you to have to do the same. So I have one chosen. I'm hitting Command D, and then I have it over here. And I'm being detailed in how I keep things lined up vertically, but I'm probably not freaking about this distance versus that distance. But like I said, clean materials have a surprise benefit of getting students to probably be a little bit more disciplined and respectful of your class. So I think this looks good enough, whereas like this would look poor. Now if I do a click and drag, and I wanted to move all three of those things over, I did this incorrectly the first time because I did not mean to move this guy too. So if I did a click and drag, I might move all of these together. Now on purpose, I'm going to show you how to get this into your document so that I can talk a little bit about the border settings. Because this is the current thing I'm working on, Google is currently treating this as my most recent item. So if I click on Google Draw, where I have my Google document that I have open, and I want to insert something, this will no longer be a new one. This is something I'm creating that is in my drive. You can pause and try that out too if you'd like. So here I have my most recent file, which is my Google drawing that I'm working on. The preview that's generated only shows the main idea, whereas right now I do have three things, but it claims to be edited seconds ago, which means that it has really recently been saved. So if I choose it here and click select, or I can just double click, I have these two choices. I can either link this to the source or I can insert it unlinked. So let's see what happens if it's unlinked at first. Looks the way it did. There's no choices up here when I click on it. And if I double click on it, it looks like I can't conveniently go in and change what I've made. I'm going to go in and I'm going to temporarily change this to green. Now when I go back to my document, there's no button for me to choose, nothing can happen. I'm going to delete that because that is not the way I wanted this to work. I did that on purpose. Clicking on Insert, I'm going to hover over Drawing again, and I'm going to choose New. I'm sorry, this one I'm choosing from Drive, and I'm clicking on Google Draw all over again, but this time I'm going to choose Link to Source. Now when I choose it, it looks like there's some sort of linked drawing options choices here, because this Google Draw inside of my Google Doc is dependent on any changes that I make here. And when I choose the other color, I know that's not the same, I now have a choice to update this and it'll refresh based on that. It's kind of nice because if you're doing something that you're maybe not 100% confident on being the final version of it, you can come back and update it as you go. I feel like that kind of takes care of a little bit about arranging. So as I move this, I'll be a little bit more thorough. I can align it underneath an object. It'll give me a vertical red line. Same deal here. It's clearly matched to my other one. And if I want it on the other side, I can clearly match it to that same guy over there. Now let's talk about selecting items. If I'm clicked in here, one way I can select all of the items in something is by choosing Command A. But maybe I don't want to select everything. Maybe I just want to choose these three down here. So if I click and drag, and I make sure I at least make contact with the objects I'm interested in, it will grab all of them for me. And then I could pick up a large entity of items. I'm sorry, I could pick this up like it were an entity, like a single entity, and move that around. But sometimes that's frustrating because maybe you have something that's hanging out here, and I don't want that. Like I want everything but that thing. So while holding Shift, I can deselect items as well. I can also click an item, hold Shift, and select multiple items at a time. And if you track my cursor clicks there, I clicked here, 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 but not there nor there. And when I pick it up, it moved all of those objects, but not the other. And then as I move and I shuffle things around, I'm consistently using Command Z to not accidentally create things in there that I dislike. think that made it clear how you can choose a range of items with the mouse or the trackpad, depending on where you're at. I also showed you that by holding onto the Shift button on the keyboard, you can individually select and deselect items. And now I'm going to show you how you could modify one at a time. Well, you're like, well, this one's kind of messed up, and these have the same shape. So if I modified one at a time, I can do a control click, and I'm looking for change shape. And I realize, I need to have a different representation of this hierarchy, so maybe it would have been more appropriate that this was an oval shape. So I'm going to click on the oval, and there it is updating for that. But doing that one at a time would be sort of frustrating. And if I'm okay making that change to all three of these, I can click and drag to select all three of them, do a control click, and then I would choose to change the shape for not just one, but all three of them at the same time. An often forgot about tool is the Format Paint button. Now finding this color, it might take me multiple tries. And this isn't just a silly exercise, like there's other applications of why you would want to use this Format Paint button. Like let's say for whatever reason this one got all messed up and even had like the wrong color. Once I have a object chosen that represents the design that I like, I can click it and then find this Format Paint button and go and click on the target one. It'll make the target one match the source and go from there. Similarly, if I wanted this to work for all the other ones, I'm going to choose Paint Format, and I can click and drag to apply it to multiple items at a time. Doesn't really work super smoothly doing one at a time, so you just have to repeat the process. Now the question is, if these two are ovals, but the other one is a rounded rectangle, will it change the rounded rectangle? And the answer is no. It'll maintain that same shape. So if that matters to you, just know that that's there. If I make a mistake, Command Z lets me back up, and I can just restart all over and get it the way I'd like it. Moving away from just creating the different shapes there, let's talk about arrows versus elbow connectors. Lines can be created. If you ever wanted to just make a letter or whatever, you want to just do it, you could do it for separate lines. But lines can be used to connect things. Now notice that as I'm doing this, it's being suggestive of what I can use. But if I want to choose an arrow, direction does matter. And here's what I mean by that. Choosing the arrow, so now I'm on the arrow tool, and my click that I start at is going to be a dead end, while the destination is going to show the arrow. But usually for our purposes, these arrows are way too small. So I jump to the select tool, choose my arrow, and I can make it thicker, and then change the color, usually if I want to. I do this for different figures and things. You could also make things dashed for whatever reason. You could put a line start and a line end if you wanted to indicate things could be bidirectional, like the flow of water depending on some chemical reaction. But that would not be appropriate if I was talking about the flow of water out of a faucet, because water does not flow into the faucet. But that's pointful, because if you're doing some things in science, you might be interested in single directional or bidirectional arrows. But I just like the look of those as we're dealing with top-down webs. So those are arrows, so I'd like to show you elbow connectors. Elbow connectors are here, and if I choose it, I'm going to do a click and drag, connecting my bottom with the top of everything else. And the reason that I prefer to do it that way is because as I move these objects around, it gives me a much better shot of getting things look clean, and they adapt as you move them. So that's why I like that more. You could always bring an object to the front by doing a control click, choosing order, and bring to front if for some reason something gets tripped up. Now that wouldn't be appropriate for this example, but if you wanted something to show up behind, you'll notice also that the other choices were send backward, send forward, and all that kind of stuff, because maybe you don't want to bring it all the way to the front. So you could like move it back like the layers of food on a sandwich or whatever. So I think that goes through what I had planned for. Arrows, elbow connectors, connecting things correctly by choosing the purple dots and then making changes, because if the format paint button works for one of them, you can probably safely assume that it might work for the other guys too. And again, you could choose multiple things at once, increasing the thickness and realizing that that looks a little too tightly spaced for your arrows. You probably want to bring it down. Other tools, Scribble. I'll remind you guys before I move on to the Scribble thing that because this Google Draw is referenced by this, it will update with a click. Now notice how I have all this extra space. That means that if I wanted to keep typing in my document, that might be kind of irritating. So as I click back on my Google Draw and I'm like satisfied with the final result here, I can bring the borders up, I can move everything around and do all that kind of stuff. And I'll make a mistake on this one so that I can prove a point. But I can make all these updates. Oh, now it's cropped. That's the mistake I was talking about. So if that ever happens, jump back, undo, or you can click and drag this corner to widen it. I'll refresh this page. It's not updating right now. But now you'll see that this text that I tried to type below, I can now type clean there, and this will end up updating itself like soon. But yeah, if that ever doesn't happen, you could just reinsert it too. Very, very rarely are there strange peculiarities in the behavior of Google Draw. Now, on purpose, I saved kind of this very last couple things to the end. You could scribble on this, but this is not drawing on a smartboard, so this would stay inside your document. On purpose, I chose to not show you this until the end for fear that you would just bypass everything, and the purpose is this is supposed to be instructional, right? So click on Insert, and then find a diagram. And you will see that there's actually hierarchy things that I can create inside here just by stealing them from Google. And this, to me, looks an awful lot like a top-down web that I can change to do what I want. So if I only wanted 3 layers or 4 or 5, I could create all kinds of different things like this. Just leaning on Google to do the work for me, changing the color of the text. And there's also other diagrams within there. Maybe this would be relevant in a science class. Maybe this would be relevant for professional development, be it things that are related. All the types of figures that you'll often see in educational materials, within reason. Hopefully this was the opposite of overwhelming. Hopefully it was eye-opening. If not, feedback is appreciated. Good luck.